went down Amazon's bestsellers and looked through there and USA Today and all those different ones, found the big sellers there, and then just kind of started branching out. After a while, it got really complicated going to each publisher separately, and so I went with Baker and Taylor. They're a big distribution center, and they could get us a pretty good deal on some of the books. So I went with them, and they actually would give recommendations of the best books. And then another huge thing was just customers, you know, what they wanted. We did a lot of special orders that way. And where we were, which was out in Eagle Mountain, there was a huge fantasy and YA niche. I actually kept my my adult fiction on sale for months, and it wouldn't sell. It just, everybody wanted the YA books, and so I knew, okay, stop spending so much money on this. And so then I went and concentrated mostly on the YA and the YA fantasy, because that was what sold. Another thing that was pretty cool was I would do a lot of hardcover books. I liked the collector's type books. Grant Sanderson came to our store to sign one time, and he's like, "You have Elantris in hardcover. This is so cool," because he didn't see it. He hadn't seen it for so long. So I went with the big ones, and then I slowly branched out from there according to what my customers wanted.
To go along with that with bookstores, a lot of people don't understand how books are sold to the booksellers from publishers. So I'll just go over basics, but most publishers offer a discount of 40 to 50%, generally over 40%. So that's one reason why independent bookstores often don't have books marked down like Amazon or Barnes & Noble, because they would have no profits. And so the big guys can negotiate much better deals for themselves, often over 50% I think, and so they are able to discount those books. But as far as taking a chance on books, the way that publishing works is there is a policy for most publishers of returns. You can return a book within maybe a month or so if it's not selling. If they didn't do that, a lot of bookstores wouldn't take risks on little-known books. And so it's sort of a catch-22 type thing with booksellers, though, because you buy these books, or put the books in your stores, and then if they don't sell, you can sort of return it. Or I guess it's more catch-22 for the author. So returns are actually pretty good. When I worked at the publisher, they said that 20% probably of returns is a good rate. You don't want it too low because it means people aren't taking a risk on your books. And you don't want it too high because obviously it means that people aren't buying your books. So,
and with that, you had two options as the bookseller. You could go returnable, and you got a slightly lower discount, or you could get non-returnable with a much bigger discount, but then you're stuck with them and you can do it. And when I had to close, I actually called Tor and said, "Hey, I know I accidentally marked this as non-returnable, but we're closing, what can you do?" And they're like, "Sure, just send it all back." And they were really cool to work with. But that's one thing to look at, is if you want it. And with the indie publishing now, they have the create space, and that's why a lot of Barnes and Nobles and stuff won't take it. It's because of that risk. They don't know what's going to happen with returnable. And you've got Ingram Spark that will do it, but a lot of times the author is the one that will actually eat the cost. A bookstore wants it, they don't get a lot of sales, so they return it, and Ingram Spark then charges the author for the leftover books. So the author can either buy them and keep them at their house, or they destroy them because it's the cost.
It does work a little bit differently. You can actually return books, there's no limit. It's not a month. You can return them whenever.
Oh, that's Baker and Taylor is the one that have that policy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For the publisher, the thing that you were saying about the authors, so that's why we actually take on the royalty statement, because if we determine that within the 6-month period you've sold 10,000 books, but we know that there's a return rate of 30%, we have to kind of keep a reserve. So we're kind of like saying, okay, for the next period, we're going to keep this much because we think we're going to get a certain percentage back. And if you historically have not had a lot of returns, you can kind of make an argument saying you should pay me all of my money now and not hold any reserves. So sometimes that happens if you're like a Brandon Anderson, somebody like that. But basically, the thing about publishing that people find so strange is that it's a consignment. Is it a consignment? Is that what that's called? Where you can kind of sell it to the retailer, and they can return it until it's out of print, and then you have to kind of put a notice out saying that no more returns on this book, this is going out of print. So that's the sad thing. When mass market was a huge thing, 80% returns was common. And so we would have print runs of 200,000 books, but that has like diminished a lot. And so we're much more efficient, and with trade books, like a 20% return is pretty decent.
To paraphrase, a lot of publishers just basically loan the books to the booksellers. And that they are getting paid for it, but then they can return it at any time.
And there's like the joke that, okay, stripped all these books and then come back and see.
Yeah.
So.
And I just add, for anyone who's interested in short fiction, the nice thing about short fiction is it's mostly open submissions. Anyone can send it in. It doesn't necessarily have higher rates of acceptance, but you are getting a certain number of stories per year or month or 6 months or whatever. And most of those anyone can submit. You'll have some that are closed to open submissions, and they do things by word of mouth a lot more like they do with books. Tor.com does that. But if you are interested in that, some good resources are Duotrope or the Submission Grinder. You can go look on them, and they just have long lists of places that are looking for short fiction, what sort of short fiction they're looking for, how long a fiction they'll take. It's a really great resource if you're looking for that.
One thing to consider with that, though, is the big guys often charge fees to submit. I think it's like Boomer Train and some of the others that, I can't remember all of them, but yeah, they charge anywhere from $5, I think I saw like $30 for one. So that's why a lot of people submit to the e-zines, because they often don't charge you for it, but they also generally don't pay. But if you're looking for publishing for this, that is.
And you can, if you're on Duotrope or the Submission Grinder, you can also search by how much places pay. So if you just want professional magazines and you're determined to get that, you can search by how much how many of them are paying a professional rate, which is currently 6 cents a word. Or however, there's semi-professional magazines that are paying anything from slightly higher than 0 to just under that 6 cents a word. And then there's fanzines and such that are paying, we just want a story, we want to put it in front of people. Will you give it to us for free? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I should also note that Duotrope is a paid service if you're going to use that, and Submission Grinder is free. So let's move on. So what are you looking for when you're purchasing a title? When you're signing on an author? What are you looking for? What sells a book or a title or an author to you?
A lot of editors and agents often talk about how they have to love a book. And it's, obviously, like Susan said, very subjective, but the reason for that is you're going to read that thing like a dozen times before you send it off to the editor, and then the editor's going to go for a couple of years of reading that thing over and over again. And if you don't love it already, you're going to tear your hair out, basically. But the other problem is you have very limited space. As an agent, I have about 21 clients, and that's still, right at this moment, is pretty full for me. And I plan to expand slowly over the years, but that's really not many. Some of the bigger guys take on a lot more, but they also, have assistants and other things to take care of that busy work. But even publishers, the publishing lists have shrunk a lot since it was basically 2008 when the economy crashed, everything in publishing changed. They laid off tons of staff. It was basically every week you'd hear another layoff, and it was just depressing. But now it's starting to come back, but still the world has changed or publishing world has changed as far as acquisitions. And advances are lower, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because you can earn out faster, and that means you start earning royalties. Because advances are, what is it called? That's against
Royalties.
Royalties, that's the word, sorry. And so you don't start earning royalties until your book earns the amount that you were given as an advance. And so if you had, some people who got like $1,000 or $100,000 deals and they didn't earn that much, the publisher's going to say, I don't know if I want to take a risk on you again. So.
What do you look for?
So, so I get about like 400 to 500 agented manuscripts a year, and theoretically these are all publishable because the agents have, screened them, and so it's just a matter of, okay, so if I have a goal of acquiring like 10 to 15 books a year and I get 500, so you can see how that is just, the odds again are very low. I don't actually have like a set budget of things that I need to acquire, but so I can afford to be really picky. And so it's just so what do I love and what do I think will sell? There are a lot of times when I really love a book, but that's just maybe a genre or for an age group that's not really selling at this moment. And so if I could put together a convincing argument, and these days the convincing argument is like the sales track of the author, or if it's a debut, it's like, okay, this book is exactly like this other book, and so it's just, if we kind of say that it's kind of like this other book, and that book sold this many copies, and then we can make the P&L work and make 40% returns or whatever, then, so it's just a matter of like sort of, you can always massage things to make it work, but you need to have a lot of support on your side. And I'm lucky in Tor is a great place to work. They're very supportive. And, I come from big corporate publishing like HarperCollins. I worked at Hyperion Books for Children, which was part of the Disney publishing group. And so those were much more corporate. I couldn't go into the publisher's office and say why I love this book so much. So publishing is a business of passion. There's no hard and fast rules. There's no guarantees. You cannot predict a bestseller. You can make a good guess these days, but it was all numbers. It was numbers on the P&L, and you can kind of, the profit and loss statement, and you can kind of like, because it's all guesswork, and say, oh, I think I'm gonna sell like 20,000 copies of this hardcover, but if you can't sort of convince your publisher that's the case, then you're not going to be able to buy that book no matter how much you love it. The difference at Tor is that I can go to my publisher, or some of my colleagues could go to Tom, who was the publisher. We didn't have an acquisition meeting until recently, and I could sit there and talk to my boss and say, this is why I love it. And Tom Doherty was the first publisher who actually said to me, if you love the book so much, we'll find a way to sell it, which is an amazing thing. It's always the opposite. It's like sales is like, we can't sell that. And it's magic. How can you sell magic? You have to, it's passion, it's word of mouth. And the book that maybe sounds completely like, a book about, a middle grade book about a boy who's deformed and, he goes to school and, what he's gonna face, that doesn't sound like it's gonna sell. But it's wonder. It's just sold thousands of copies because of the passion, and there was nothing to compare it to. So you just have to sort of go with your gut and publish what you love. And your job as the editor is just to sell it through all the different channels. And it goes from it's from the author to the editor, and then it's the editor saying to the marketing people, to all the publishing people, it's the marketing people saying to the sales people, sales going to the booksellers, and then the booksellers to the end user. And every step of that process, it's why do I love this book and why you should love it too. It's the impulse of, when you love a book as a kid and you want your friends to read it so you can talk about it, that's what publishing is. And you cannot quantify that. So you cannot quantify passion. And so that's why we are going to always have books that surprise us and that are unpredictable bestsellers.
One thing to go along with that, the people who have the final say on what is acquired is often sales and marketing. I've had books get all the way through acquisitions, everyone loved it, even the publisher, all of them just absolutely loved this book, and sales and marketing said no. And so it didn't happen. So, that's something to keep in mind too. It's sort of depressing, but...
I'd also like to add that this is part of why having a really strong, solid pitch can be so important, because once you sell this book the first time, it's still going to be sold over and over and over again. There's just a chain of sales that have to be made. And the better a hook you can have, the easier you make it for your editor to be able to, your agent to be able to sell it to an editor, and your editor to sell it to the rest of the company, and so on and so forth down the line. The easier it's going to be for everyone, and the more tempting that's going to be.
And then you take it to the next level with the store, and like I said, I had very specific niches at my store, and I was a small town, small business, and I had to cater to them. We also had Melissa and Doug Toys. Melissa and Doug is one who will just send you whatever they want. And I had to flat out say, do not send me anything over $15. I will not sell it. It does not happen in this city. And so I had to be really careful. And I actually did do a little bit of a discount on my hardcovers because otherwise they wouldn't sell. I couldn't go a lot because, like you said, I didn't get as good of a discount. But one of my favorites was, well, one of the more annoying ones, was Mockingjay came out. And Walmart sold theirs for $9, which was, I believe, underselling themselves because Walmart didn't care.
It's a loss leader, and basically they wanted people in the store to buy that, so they buy other things.
Exactly, yeah, and they didn't care. Costco's the same way. And so they sold out by 9 a.m. and I still had a ton. And I sold mine for 25% off. And I had a few people come in, see the price. It wasn't as cheap as Walmart, so they'd leave. And one lady, it was literally from me to him, and on the phone complaining about the cost. And I said, actually, it's 25% off, because I couldn't keep it quiet anymore. She looks at me, she looks at the book, hangs up, and buys the book, because it's 25% off. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's the same price it was 2 seconds ago, but whatever.
I had an experience like that when Mockingjay came out. I had someone walk into my store and asked, so how much are you selling it for? And I said, the regular price. And she said, oh, and then walked back out.
I had that happen all the time. Oh, we could get this cheaper at Costco. Oh, we could get this cheaper at Walmart. And I'm like, you guys are realizing, number one, if, the money will go back to the city, blah, blah. But, you have to support the small stores too. And not just the ones that can, and we actually bought books from Costco sometimes, and they knew we were doing it. Percy Jackson could not stay on our shelves. We couldn't get it fast enough. And so we'd have to do that sometimes because that was our only option. And so we had to look at those books that would just fly off our shelves. Diary of a Wimpy Kid was another one. It could not stay on our shelves. And so why would we go buy the ones that we could never sell when we have these other ones that would sell like crazy? And so that was what we had to look at, was what was the most popular in our area.
I want to jump to the other side of that question, and instead of what appeals to you in a book, what kind of pushes you away from a book? What makes you go, you know what, maybe this is okay, but there's just that one thing that turns it off?
For me, it's definitely the quality of the writing is what sells it, and so, writing that is not fully polished or doesn't have a distinctive voice, it's just, it's just, you can tell that it's bad writing or writing that is serviceable or is okay. Like for me, one of my pet peeves right now in YA is that everything I seem to get, I think it's probably because of Hunger Games and other things, is first person present tense voice, which annoys the shit out of me. It's not the classic. I tend to like classic writing, but just, it's not the traditional, and it's harder to pull off, so why are you giving yourself that, it might just be a personal thing, but I think it's harder to pull off, and so it can be, if it's done really well, that's fantastic, and I really admire it, and I love it, and I would buy it, but if it's just this sort of flat, it sounds like everybody else, and you're just trying to sound like a teenager, and that sense of immediacy. It's like that thing with Bridget Jones when it was just like she was telling the story, like she was narrating like second by second. It was charming in Bridget Jones, but then trying to do that, it just. So anyway, I'm sorry for anybody who's writing in that. Just you can do it. Just do it really well.
One that really, since I do children's, young adult, picture books, all of that, I often get stories with a moral, and that drives me insane. I want a good story, and if it turns out that if someone does learn from it, that's great, but writing with the intent to teach kids something drives me insane. I just don't even go there, because most of the time, it's the author being very didactic and telling kids, you need to brush your teeth. That kind of a thing, and it's not interesting.